So, ladies and gentlemen, I think we're pretty much good to go. Everybody comfortable, hopefully. So, we're going to hear from politicians who are all vying for your votes at this fairly crucial, I think, general election. Should we maybe just go round and we'll let everybody introduce themselves, and maybe you can just take a minute or so to let us know what your pitch is at this election. Shall we start with Kenny here?
Well, thank you. I'm Kenny McCaskill. I'm the Alba Party candidate for this constituency here. In the past, I have been the Justice Secretary and the MP for East Lothian. I think what I'd just like to do is to start by thanking you. You've been through COVID. We're experiencing a deterioration in behaviour by certain elements in our society that you're obviously again front-facing. There are obviously things that have taken place in government that you disagree with, that I have supported. Some of that I think we'll just have to disagree with. And doors always open to discuss. There's other things that we've done that I've no doubt you support. So I think what we have to do is just to keep that relationship there. I'm very grateful for what you do. It's not just the job you do, it's what you are in the community that is so vital. And therefore, I do accept that there have been things that have impinged, and hopefully we can mitigate, amend, and indeed go forward to make your life easier.
Okay, thank you very much. Brian.
Hi, my name is Brian Whittle. I am Shadow Minister for Economic Development, Business and Tourism, previously Environment, Biodiversity and Land Reform, and previously Health and Sport. I think this election, I think is fairly seismic, to be quite honest. I think that given what the country's been through in the last 5 or 6 years, what I'm getting is a tiredness from the doors of people who are getting to the point where they're not sure which box to put their cross in, and there's definitely a feeling that of mistrust in our political system across the whole country, both in Scotland and in the UK. I think for me the most important thing that we need to do is re-establish our connection with business, re-establish that trust, re-establish the open communication when we're making policy, so that people don't feel that the policy is being done to them, that they are part of the decision-making process. And I think whatever comes out of this election, I think that is absolutely crucial as we go forward. But I think business at the moment, we all know, especially from your perspective, was really difficult during the whole COVID. And we've almost forgotten about that, and we're almost back to, we always feel that that's in the past. But I think we're all still feeling the effects, of the economy's feeling the effects of that, and we're still trying to battle against that. And sometimes we see it in a bubble, and we think about where we are in Scotland, where we are in the UK. But when we look across the globe, I think globally there's some significant issues that are universal across the whole of the planet. But for me, it's re-establishing that connection with business is going to be crucial.
Okay. Daniel Johnson, what's your pitch?
So, first of all, thank you very much for having me. I'm Daniel Johnson. I'm the Scottish Labour MSP for Edinburgh Southern. I'm also currently Scottish Labour Shadow Cabinet Secretary for the Economy, Business and Fair Work. And perhaps most importantly for this audience is probably most of you are bored of hearing me say to meetings like this, I am a former shopkeeper, former retailer, so bring that perspective. But look, this is an important election because I think most people would say that we need a change. The circumstances are such that we've had 3 major events in the last few years that would ordinarily be thought of as being once-in-a-decade events. Brexit, COVID, and the cost of living, which is almost a misnomer because it is just as equally a cost of doing business crisis. All 3 of those have been major earthquakes in terms of our society, our economy, and I would say all 3 of which have disproportionately impacted retail. I think what was really striking for me during COVID is that suddenly people woke up at just how important retail was in terms of their just ability to sustain themselves and sustain their families, which is why it was right that retail workers were considered key workers through that lockdown. But we've seemed to have very quickly forgotten that, as we've seen retail violence and retail crime soar out of control. So I think it is important that we actually have an election that's about fixing some of the economic problems, fixing some of the sheer chaos that we've had from the current government, where we saw mortgage rates spike, interest rates increase, and much more so in this country than in others. But we also need an approach which I think recognises the challenge that governments both in Holyrood and Westminster have placed on retail. I think for too long, governments of all colours, including my own, have thought it's an easy way to do public policy is to get retailers to do it. Public policy at the till point, another button, whether it's from bag charges, deposit return, consultations on alcohol advertising, all of which are worthy, but at best haven't thought through the detail and the impact on retail, at worst, putting at risk your livelihoods. So we need a change in government to put stability and clarity and a plan at the forefront, getting rid of the chaos that we've had. But I would say as a retailer, what we really need is governments that take retail seriously and stop putting things in the way and making life difficult in terms of you running your businesses. And with that, I'll hand over to William.
Yep, let's hear from Willie Rennie.
So I'm Willie Rennie, I'm the economy spokesperson for the Scottish Liberal Democrats. I grew up in this sector. My father was a grocer who had 3 shops in Fife, so I know the sector pretty well. It has transformed in those decades since though, and you are facing constant change and in many cases turmoil, which I want to understand a little bit more about today. You are, as Dan said, at the forefront of often public policy in terms of minimum pricing alcohol, on vapes, on tobacco, or even on gambling. You are at the forefront of that. So we need to understand you better so that we can help you deliver those priorities for government. But also, we need you to exist because we've seen a retreat from post offices, on banks. Many high streets are just not what they used to be, and we need them as part of our community fabric. We need them to continue to exist. Some of the most deprived communities only have one business within their community, and that's often you. So we need you to be there as part of that community cohesion, but we know it's challenging, and we make your life bloody difficult sometimes. And we want to understand that a little bit more today. I'm not coming here with a lot of immediate solutions, because we know it's difficult. We know that your energy bills have gone through the roof. We know that the pandemic had a dramatic impact on your business. The price of goods has soared. We know all of those things. But we need you to exist, so we need to understand more. But Daniel's right. In one respect, I think the country's crying out for change. What kind of change is really what we need to understand more about. But we need business stability. We need some certainty about the future so that you can plan for the future to make your businesses a success.
And I should just say, you'll notice an empty chair here. We did invite Ivan McKee of the SNP, but for whatever reason, he's not with us today. And we also did invite the Greens, and they decided not to provide a spokesperson for our panel. As before, hands up if you want to ask a question. This is your chance, obviously, to speak directly to the politicians here. So please put your hand up if you have a question as we go along. There's a lot of issues specific to this trade, Brian Whittle, but maybe before we start with that, can we talk about the kind of general stuff here? Why should people vote for the Tories given the chaos of Boris Johnson, of Liz Truss, and now it seems of Rishi Sunak too, and your own Scottish leader deciding in the midst of an election campaign that he's off?
Well, thank you for coming to me first.
I can answer that for you, Brian.
Thank you. As long as we start gentle, a nice, easy one to start off with. But I think in general, where I look in this is in terms of the principles of why I'm a Scottish Conservative. I mean, I believe, that opportunities should be available for all. I believe that effort should be rewarded. I believe in a low tax economy. I believe that that not only should the opportunity be available for all, but that people understand those opportunities and are confident enough to take those opportunities. So that's my basic principles in terms of why I fall into the Conservatives. Have we got everything right? It would be crazy for me to say that we have, because we most definitely haven't. I think for sure we have suffered from what many long-term governments do. We've seen, if you look through the ages, Thatcher, Blair, the SNP now, and ourselves, in that we tend to, infighting tends to start a ball rolling. However, I think, you know, my feel and from the party is it's been a seismic shock, and quite rightly so. We should have had. We need that shock, but to reel in those who were starting to on the fringes of the party, who were starting to have too much of a voice, I think for sure.
So who do you mean by that?
I'm not telling you.
Okay.
I think
Nigel Farage.
I think Nigel Farage is not in my party. You know, and never.
Some would like.
Never will be in my party. Let me tell you
sure?
that. Yeah, because I wouldn't be in the party if Nigel Farage was in the party. Let me tell you, he's got a lot to answer for, that man. But I think that in terms of we were talking about, you know, the far right of our party, you know, and I think politics globally at the moment is my concern with politics globally at the moment is it's going further right and further left, and I think we need to be in the centre of that. And I think the shock that has happened to my party in recent times, I mean, they did great things in terms of, Sunak did some great things as Chancellor through COVID, I think the economy was such that we were able to do that. But since then, we certainly haven't got it right. So I think we are the party of business. We are the party that understands business. And you know, I think the shock that we've had brings us back to the centre. And at the end of the day, the alternative's not great.
Well, we'll look at the alternative, and the polls suggest that Labour is the strong alternative at the moment in terms of polling. But Daniel Johnson, you face the same allegation that the Conservatives face, which is making a lot of promises about finances, but not really being clear on exactly how things will be funded. We hear no tax rises, no VAT rises, but lots of spending commitments. The Independent Institute for Fiscal Studies and others say these plans just don't add up. You're just not being straight with the public.
Well, look, first and foremost, where we are being clear, and particularly for this audience, is that we will have a cap on corporation tax. In the current administration, we've seen more changes in the corporation tax rate than the entirety of the Labour government just since, I think certainly the last election, but certainly the last 5 years. And likewise, we are committed to replacing business rates in England. Obviously, that's reserved, but we have a similar policy up here.
But this will be an audience who's also concerned about the NHS and public services and how you fund those too, not just about taxes.
And the reality of this situation is if we are lucky enough to get the opportunity to govern, those things will be very difficult. And we've made no bones about it. We've had to alter some of our plans just because of the state of those public finances. So that comes first and foremost, is economic stability, making sure that we live within our means, that we, by and large, ensure that day-to-day spending is being met from tax receipts, and that we reduce debt is the golden rule. So, I mean, you say about where will the money come from, that is the absolute, because we can't, the absolute benchmark, because we can't have a repeat of what we had under the last Tory government, where we had the biggest single rise in lending rates for mortgages in a single day since Black Wednesday. That's the reality of what the current Conservative government has delivered. As far from being the party of economic stability, the party of business, they've been the party of instability and the party of chaos. What we need is a party and a government that is focused on delivering that stability, and some of that will be boring. And some of that may mean that we have to make the hard decisions, which I think we've been demonstrating that we're able to do in opposition. So it will be hard, but that's the reality of the economic situation and the public finances that we would be inheriting.
And those issues, Kenny McCaskill, the public finances, taxation, etc., are very high up the list of people's priorities. The NHS, very much near the top. Yet your top priority seems to be independence. It seems to be what your party exists for. Is there a mismatch there at this election, particularly between what you're pitching and what people want to hear?
No, because I think nothing makes a case for independence more than the absurdity of being an energy-rich country and yet a fuel-poor people. It's not just that we have a third and rising of our people struggling to heat their homes, a quarter of our pensioners living in extreme fuel poverty. We have businesses that are closing because they cannot run the power bills. It's not just energy and heating, but the power that goes with it. That is absurd. We have the threat to the refinery just a stone's throw across the road there. That is where the Forties pipeline comes ashore from the North Sea. If that closes, Scotland will be the only major oil-producing nation that does not have a refinery capacity. The only nations that are similar are the likes of the Republic of Congo and Trinidad and Tobago. They produce less oil and gas than Scotland. They don't have a refinery capacity. Basically, we're being deindustrialised, and they're taking our raw product and they're then going to sell it back to us at a premium. It is utterly ridiculous. It was the chief executive of Octopus, not a member of my party, of Octopus, that said Scotland should be having cheap energy. Because it's not just the oil and gas coming in here, it's the turbines on the hills. As I walked my dog at Dunbar Beach earlier today, it's the turbines in the Forth off our shores that produce even more energy. We're an energy-rich country and a fuel-poor people, and that's why we need independence to get control of that, because countries like Denmark, even the Republic of Ireland, are getting control of their energy policy. They're creating revenue, they're creating jobs, they're growing businesses, and yet we're the people that can't turn on our heating, and businesses are having to shut the door because they can't pay the bill. That's why we need independence.
But businesses are also making the transition, and we've been talking about this morning, about moving to electric vehicles, moving to solar panels, etc. Is it time to shut off the taps of the North Sea?
No, absolutely not. I think we have to continue to use our own resource. It's ludicrous to shut it down. What we do have to do is to maximise the benefit that Scotland is well pleased to get from renewables. Scotland's going to be producing 100% of green hydrogen. It's going to be used to reduce the cost of INEOS in the plastics plant. It's growing in the whisky sector, they're going in there. What we have to do is to make sure that we use that green hydrogen so that it can be used as well as for powering plants. It can also be used for powering engines. There's a company just up the road, Alexander Dennis, who make hydrogen and electric buses. We should be actually seeing orders going there so that we can get buses created here, we can get cheaper fuel into our tanks, people can get on the bus and it's more cost effective, you can keep more routes going. And what are we seeing? Transport for London has sent an order to China for new buses. The majority of orders haven't been going not just to Alexander Dennis, but going to Ballymena or indeed to Yorkshire. We have to have a virtuous circle. We have to make sure that the energy that we have, whether it's oil and gas or whether it's onshore or offshore renewables, that we actually benefit from it, that we get revenue for it, that we get jobs from it, because we're not getting the jobs from it at the present moment. The jobs are going elsewhere, not just in turbine construction, but other aspects. We have to make sure that we get the businesses located here. We have to make sure that it's that virtuous circle. It can be done. It should be done. It's not being done at the present moment when you're closing the refinery and you're giving the orders for turbines and the orders for buses, of hydrogen buses that are cutting technology, you're giving them to China.
Willie Rennie, your party has released its manifesto. You're the first to do it. But in that manifesto, again, a bit like the point I was making to Daniel Johnson, there are a lot of spending commitments, not a great deal of detail on where the money's coming from. So-called efficiency savings is one of the big measures. That's easy to say, not so easy to deliver.
I mean, there are, it is costed. There's three quite major tax rises that are included in it. A windfall tax on oil and gas and the excess profits. There's the global giants, the internet giants, in order to fund mental health. There's an issue to do with the with buybacks on trading, and that will raise a significant amount of money that's also equivalent being raised in the United States.
Would that windfall tax affect jobs, as some claim?
No, because
these
are excess profits. What we need to do is to give certainty for the future for Scottish industry so that they can plan, and they will know certainly that this is a one-off windfall tax on the excess profits, and after that they'll be able to plan for the future. So no, we've costed all of this. No, I think what we need is, we've heard from Kenny there, but I'm afraid this is the kind of politics we've heard for the last 10, 15 years of endless wild promises that never really turn to reality. We've had Brexit, we've had the campaign on independence, we've had Liz Truss budget, we've had Boris Johnson and his parties in Downing Street. We actually, bluntly, need a bit of pragmatic, boring government just to get things done. Because people now, businesses now, can't afford to wait for endless promises to be possibly fulfilled in decades to come. They need answers right now, and that's why I think we need a change in government. We need a change in the Parliament so that we've got MPs who are focused on delivering right now on the things that matter, cutting down on the cost of living, making sure that farmers have got plans for the future to be able to grow the food that we produce and sell in our shops. We need to make sure that industry has got plans for its workforce, so we have reformed the apprenticeship levy so that we can get a more flexible skills and apprenticeship programme in place to scale and upskill our workforce. These are the things that we need to be done. Now, it sounds really boring, but to be honest, government has just been reaching for easy solutions for far too long, and they've never actually done the things that the country needs to make progress. So that's what I think you'll get with Liberal Democrats. We will be focused on getting stuff done right now that affects people's lives right now, than endless fantasy promises for the future.
Well, Brian Whittle, while we've been meeting here today, Rishi Sunak has been unveiling your party's manifesto, another cut in national insurance he's promising. Again, more tax cuts, but people might particularly want to hear about growth, rebuilding the economy. What would your party do differently this time round that you've not done in the past 14 years?
I think one of the biggest things I heard from Rishi Sunak, one of the most things that I was listening to on the way in, was an extra 100,000 apprentices. That for me is one of the biggest things. I think education is the cornerstone, in my view, of every portfolio. The biggest drag on the Scottish economy is a poor health record. And the way to deal with a poor health record is through our education system. And at a time when we're talking about this just transition away from oil and gas to the green, which, I'm fed up hearing the word just transition. What we need to do is we do need to move away. We need to have a plan to move away from oil and gas into the green energy. But the reality is we've lost 40,000 oil and gas jobs and created 10,000 green jobs. And we're cutting apprenticeships in Scotland. How does that help? The one thing we need is we need engineers, we need tradespeople, we need the soft skills. So we need to invest in our education system if it's the only way we can have a just transition away from oil and gas and into the green economy. And in terms of, we're talking about green hydrogen, I'm a massive fan of green hydrogen. Bore these guys in Parliament talking about it all the time, as well as many other things I talk about. We have a huge opportunity in those kind of industries, and yet the Scottish Government have cut all the funding for that. And it just doesn't make sense, not joined up thinking. So it's about looking, the only one thing I'll agree with Willie on is long-term planning, which politicians are extraordinarily bad for. And the way to deal with that is...
Well, the electoral cycle doesn't help, I guess.
No, exactly right. The electoral cycle doesn't help. And I think the way in which we can now conduct our politics doesn't help either. Even in my decade in politics, I've seen a huge change in attitude. And what we should be doing is what we agree on. Rishi Sunak announcing a real times increase in the health budget through the next Parliament, which is really welcome. And the biggest thing in that everybody's missed out is £3.5 billion invested into new tech and AI, which is the first thing we have to do if we're going to deliver a health service. And the way to deal with it is through the educational environment. There's two things we could do in health. We can either put more and more money into it and treat more and more people, or we can look at how we reduce the number of people that actually need the treatment. And that's something, that's the hard bit. As Willie said, there's a lot of hard things. That's a cultural change, and it'll take a bit of time. So I think, for me, the two big things that come out of that, yes, we are cutting national insurance, but I think it will help to put more money in people's pocket. But it's 100,000 apprentices, which I accept is not in Scotland, but I would really encourage the Scottish Government to rethink their cut to the education, and also the fact that £3.5 billion going into developing technology and AI in the health service.
Can you give us some specifics, Daniel Johnson? We know, food prices have gone up, interest rates have gone up, energy costs have gone up. All of these things will affect people in this room in terms of running their businesses. We don't have the Labour manifesto yet, it's coming later this week, but will there be specific measures there to reduce those things and make life easier for people in terms of the business?
I mean, in terms of the longer term, and this is not a quick fix at all, but I agree with the fundamental point that Kenny makes, is that we need to have a very clear-eyed look at energy because energy is fundamental to the economy. Successful economies throughout history have always been the ones that have had reliable access to cheap energy, and making sure that we get the transition right, because the transition is coming whether we like it or not, and that's what GB Energy is about. It's about ensuring that we actually get the investment in things like turbines, ports, supply chain, so that we can actually take part in the energy economy. An energy economy which looks increasingly international, and frankly Scotland will need to be supplying into the UK grid, supplying to the rest of the UK in order to be successful at that. So that's the long term. In the shorter term, we want to do things like reform business rates. So again, that's reserved, but I think it's a signal of where we want to take things. We want to reform planning policy so that we can build the houses we need and get on with dealing with that housing emergency. And I think one of the problems we'll have, I completely agree with Brian, but I'm not sure Brian is looking at his own party's record. I absolutely agree about the need to look at training, and we are committed to reforming the apprenticeship levy. But the reality is that apprenticeship levy has been massively underspent by this UK Conservative government. It's also not been able to be spent by the key sectors where that levy is raised, particularly the retail sector. So the retail sector is one of the biggest levy payers, and yet the programmes available to upskill and improve the capacities of retail workers have just not been present, either north of the border or south of the border. So actually making sure that we have a skill system that is fit for purpose, that actually enables people to upskill where they are, that isn't a kind of a one-size-fits-all, much more flexible, much more targeted to individual sectors and workplaces, so that actually that money that's being raised can be spent. And we really have to look at the way the levy works between south of the border and north of the border, which isn't easy, because it's ridiculous that we have people paying the levy up here but unable to access those funds in the way that they're supposed to.
Okay, Kenny McCaskill, Pete actually wants to ask a question. I'll come back to you in a second. Yes.
You talk about legislation, what you want to do, but none of you really are talking about the things that really matter to the convenience sector. Retail crime. Retail crime. Daniel, you know that well enough. The judicial system, which is absolutely clogged up.
Yep.
The illicit trade. Even by sorting out illicit trade, revenue could get an extra £2 to £3 billion a year by sorting that out. The emphasis is always on new legislation. Let's cut that out. Let's sort out the problems and issues that we have first. None of the parties ever talk about that.
Well, maybe I'll ask the former Justice Secretary.
Well, yes, I think there's two things. There's the violence, and I'll come on to the illicit trade. In terms of violence, I think we're in a new stage. I became Justice Secretary in 2007. My predecessor had already set up the Violence Reduction Unit. We actually used that because we did have to have vigorous law enforcement. We did have to enforce the laws, including stop and search, and we did have to have very serious sentences imposed. Equally, we had to try and also get a solution elsewhere. I think world has changed. Individuals have changed. We've had kids who have grown up in dysfunctional families for 2 years during lockdown, and frankly, they are running wild. So I think we're dining out and putting in perhaps policies that were applicable 10, 15 years ago are not applicable to the post-COVID thing. So what we have to do is to make sure that we do have tough action, visible enforcement. The courts do have to do their job, but we also do have to sit down and work out what we do with these youngsters who are, frankly, off their rocker, having, grown up in a household that's totally dysfunctional. That has to be done. In terms of illicit trade, I think you'll remember, Pete, that for a while and before I returned to politics, I was chairing the Scottish Anti-Illicit Trade Group. I think one of the things I have to say I'm really surprised at is why the government brought in free ports. I actually had the City of London police coming to me about, the huge opportunity for illicit trade that is going to come from free ports. And when you've got a free port that runs for 45 miles both sides of a river, they just put their heads in their hands and shoot. We do have a problem with illicit trade. People think, in the public, I think, the trade knows better, that it's simply fags. It's not. It's everything in our life, and it's fundamentally dangerous and damaging. And therefore, I think we actually have to ramp up what we do to protect legitimate trade, not just leave it to the organisation, and I think the anti-illicit trade group's still there, we need to support them, but we do need to get that broader and deeper, and we also have to get the message out to the public that if it's too good to be true, it's too good to be true. It's not just dangerous to them, it's damaging to the whole of our society because of the threat that it creates, not just that it's undermining legitimate trade, people who do pay their taxes, who do pay their workers appropriately, but also, as I say, what it does in terms of the caustic, corrosive attitude. So that's what needs to be done. There's lessons to be learned, there's intellectual work to be done, but a lot of it's just the old-time religion. Get the police out there, get the courts doing their duty, and let's make sure we target that illicit trade.
Willie Rennie, do you have specific answers to these questions? Is it time for the police to get tougher with those who commit these crimes?
I mean, part of the problem is that the police are not what they once were. The reach of them, certainly in communities, is not as great. If one of your workers is assaulted in the shop, it takes quite some time for the police to come round, and the action that's taken following that often is very limited. So we do need to have an understanding that the police need to be much more available, but also we need to improve the intelligence that's available in order to crack down. Now, partly it's because of the measures that government has taken, that it's made it more restrictive to access certain products, and the cost of living crisis that's pushing up the illicit trade. That doesn't necessarily mean we should change the policy. We just need to be better at actually cracking down on illicit activities. And, Kenny's set out some of the measures that we need to be implementing in order to try and do that. But we understand the challenge that creates for yourself. Because if somebody's selling products that are far cheaper than you're selling in your shop, it's no surprise when people are really up against it that they're going down that route. So, yes, we need to improve policing within our communities. Yes, we need to invest in the new technologies and the intelligence, invest in the universities who are doing research in these areas to make sure we've got the best intelligence. Those are the steps that we need to take in order to deal with that. But it's challenging. We're not going to solve it overnight, but we do need to take the steps that are important.
The gentleman here's got his hand up. He'd like to ask a question.
One of the easy things would be to bring back the community policeman.
Yeah.
I think that would be a great start.
Ryan Whittle, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, sure. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, Willie's touched on this, the fact that we don't have the police force we once had. We don't have the justice system we once had either. We've got a very soft touch on justice just now. We've got the ridiculous situation where the police are saying that they actually can't attend all crimes now. I mean, that's just ridiculous.
We've also got overcrowding in the prisons as well, so you could argue that maybe it's not a soft touch to sentencing.
But the actual the solution to this is not just that side. There's another side of this coin, and I think the erosion of community. Or the erosion of, and I talk about this all the time, sport and art and music and drama and youth clubs and all these sort of things. The erosion of all of that have given our kids less and less and less and less outlets of where to go. So I've always said this: if you don't give the kids a gang to belong to, they'll make their own gang. So it's not just there's not just one side of this coin. We talk about justice, and justice has to be seen to be served. Both for the perpetrator and those who are at the other side of that. But the other thing we have to look at is again longer term solutions, looking at harder things to deal with, which is how we recreate community again, because the community in many ways policed itself, and we seem to have eroded that. So there's no easy answer to this, but we actually have to have an acceptance that there's some hard things we have to do, and longer term strategy and longer term planning to prevent what's happening at the moment.
Do you have specific solutions from the Labour Party?
Well, I mean, first of all, I was the MSP that brought forward the legislation to create a specific statutory offence of assaulting a retail worker in the last Parliament, and I was very pleased to see Yvette Cooper just in the last few days pledging to bring that forward, but also pledging to end kind of a value threshold at which police will attend. That in many parts of the country, that if the value of goods being stolen is less than £200, essentially police will just draw a line and say we're not attending, and that has to end. And it has to end for one very good reason, is that actually shoplifting is not a low tariff crime. As you will all be aware, what we've seen is an absolutely mushrooming of shoplifting becoming absolutely integral to organised crime, goods being stolen to order, being part of much wider gangs involved in the illicit trade, everything from counterfeit goods, including cigarettes, through to illicit drugs, and actually you can't ignore it. It is the classic example of kind of broken windows, is if you allow crime in one area, you're essentially creating a permissive environment. But let's also be clear that one of the fundamental problems is not soft touch crime, it's an ineffective criminal justice system. In England, we've seen a massive reduction in the resourcing of the court system and the police. There's been about something along the lines of a 25% reduction in headcount, and with reports just in the last week showing that for many courts in England, it's taking up to 5 years for cases to go from charge to actually being heard. You can't have a justice system with those sorts of delays. And we've got similar things in Scotland. And the other point I would make is this, is that if you go back to when records began on police numbers, we've got very approximately twice the number of police officers we had in the 1970s. Do we feel we have twice the police presence? I don't think so. What we've seen is an over-focus on creating centralised specialist units. Now, there was a need for that when, in one sense, when Police Scotland was created, but it's come at the expense of local divisions. It's why you have a significant reduction across Edinburgh and the Lothians in particular, in terms of the numbers of police officers available at any given time to do response work. We saw the number of police stations, for example, in Edinburgh, that with response officers available, shrink down to 3. There are some parts of the country, or towns, which will essentially not have police officers present on a Friday or a Saturday night. So we were right to make sure that we have specialist police officers, but that shouldn't have come at that expense of frontline response officers. And critically, what we've ended up with the number of police officers, the number of police sergeants now doing clerical work is absolutely shocking. So we actually need to really support the police to invest in the systems that they need to make sure that we have that emphasis on frontline policing, community policing that we have lost over the last decade.
Yeah, so we need to try and deal with the root causes of much of this behaviour. And there's two in my mind that are significant. One is mental health. The number of people who've got some severe mental health issues, some moderate as well, that is consuming a huge amount of time for the police and the NHS. And we don't have the mental health service, therefore, that actually is able to deal with that. We have police officers that spend hours on end in hospitals because they have to be with somebody who's got a mental health crisis. Now, we should have mental health professionals alongside the police to be able to take that pressure off. That's the first thing. You'll see that in your shops. The second one is the drugs crisis. We have got a record number of deaths, and it's not going down to any significant degree. It's much higher than most other countries in Europe. And that is breaking down the fabric in our communities, and it's leading to greater amounts of crime as well as they feed their habit. And we've still not cracked the policy on drugs. We should be looking at countries like Portugal, where they've got commissions, to be able to decriminalise the approach to it so you can deal with the root causes of why people are actually getting addicted to these drugs and try and get them into the treatment centres that they are sorely needing now. So we need to deal with both of those crises, because that's fueling an awful lot of the crime in our communities. And we simply aren't even at the races with these things. And until we do that, we're going to have ever greater demands on our police services, who will not be able to deal with the problems that you face in your businesses.
Yep, let me hear from Luke.
On a sort of different topic, it's
yep.
with the VAT, which is sort of for goods and services sitting at 20%, and I just wondered, do you think it's realistic to be hopeful that maybe it could potentially come back at some point to 17.5, or and I know that maybe 10, 15 years ago it was sitting at 15%, but I just didn't really have your thoughts on that, please. Thank you.
Ken McCaskill?
I mean, I have to say I don't see it coming back, because I think the UK government, of whichever complexion, is going to be so tight for cash. I certainly think what we do need to do is actually see some tweaks to it, and I would much prefer doing that. I've long argued, along with the SLTA and others in hospitality, that, for example, we should be reducing VAT on alcohol being served with a meal, all of these things. So small tweaks, I think, there that you'll get. But I think any government coming in, given the state of finances, given the challenges in terms of taxation, I don't think we're going to see any significant change there. We certainly can't put it up anymore, and I think what we have to do is to probably look at how we give a bit more exemptions in areas that we want and that are actually quite sensible and practical.
Well, Brian, we'll maybe address that VAT question, but on the wider point as well about, we hear at these elections, oh, we're going to reduce red tape. All politicians say this, but the people in this room are labouring under all kinds of new regulations when it comes to vapes, tobaccos, minimum unit pricing, etc. Is there any respite from that?
I'll go back to what I said initially. I'll come back to VAT in a minute, but I'll go back to what I said initially around where I think that the mistakes have been made is not necessarily in the policy, but it's actually in the way in which the industry itself has been included within the policy in terms of advising and putting forward their point of views. I think that's the biggest one for me. I think that there's a disconnect at the moment, or has been a disconnect for quite some time, where the feeling I get is that policy has been imposed upon rather than discussed and developed in conjunction with. I think that for me is the biggest issue we have to deal with, because I think if we actually had a conversation, the things we talked about, minimum unit pricing, vaping or cutting down on banning of single-use vapes and all that sort of stuff, I think we could have a sensible conversation around that. But I just don't think that the industry have been included within that conversation, which is, I can understand why, because these are profitable things. These are profitable things to sell,
But there are health implications which then feeds into the government's budgets.
But the point is, though, there are health. The key to that is there are health implications. But what we should be doing is go, okay, if we're going to deal with this and curb this, we have to make sure that there are other measures that are taken to fill that gap and fill that void. And I don't think that's been done. In terms of VAT, I don't think you can tinker around the edges with VAT. I think the practicalities of delivering on a tinkering about would be just too complicated. And again, we're putting more red tape in the way. If you're going to make a change to VAT, it has to be significant and it has to be across sort of major areas of the economy. Would I like to see VAT come down? Yes, I would. Probably for a slightly different reason. Probably because that in terms of household budgets, I think it helps those who are struggling the most. So I'd like to see that. Will it happen any time soon? I was listening to what Rishi Sunak had to say in the way in, and VAT wasn't mentioned. Other things were, but that specific one wasn't mentioned. But it's something I think that we need to look at very significantly, because it is something that can, as I said, I would look at it from the perspective of the buyer. But if we're going to change it, we have to make root and branch change to it. I don't think you can tinker around the edges with it.
What are your thoughts on VAT, Daniel Johnson, and on what people might see as over-regulation? Some of that regulation, the government would say, is to protect the public, but is it too much?
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, first of all, I have to say just very clearly and frankly, just given the state of the public finances, I certainly don't see any major changes to the headline rate. I think 20% is sort of probably locked in for the next 5 years, regardless of who gets in. I'm going to, probably to maybe the panel shock, agree with Kenny and disagree with Brian about tinkering with VAT. Because we already tinker with it. Books and children's clothes, food are all exempt. We have a different rate of VAT for energy, and we also have different consumption taxes. I think one of the things I would just say on a personal rather than a party political basis, I have a basic instinctive disinclination towards consumption taxes for two critical reasons. One is that they tend to depress the volumes of trade because you're increasing the price, and secondly, they tend to disproportionately hit the less well-off in society, especially VAT. That if you're earning £20,000, that ability to pay VAT is far, far less than someone earning £100,000. It is a very regressive way of taxing. But unfortunately, it's here to stay. It came in when we joined the European community, back, and there was a requirement then, and I don't see it going away because it's the second largest tax by receipt after income tax and just before corporation tax. So, I think the final point is this: is when we do make changes, and I remember having to alter the VAT rates, when I was running my shops, when Alistair Darling reduced the rate, and that was welcome. But I also remember that the time of year was right after Christmas, when I had a lot of other things to do in my shop. It's a good example of getting the detail right, especially around the timing of these changes, is really important. Thinking about when retailers or other consumer-facing businesses have peak periods or might be busy, and trying to actually phase in changes when trade is quieter and you've got a bit more time, as opposed to right off the back of the busiest point in the year. I mean, I think I'm right in saying, did it come in on January the 1st in 2009, something like that? But I would have almost preferred it coming at the end of January rather than the beginning, just in terms of the ease of implementation. Because I was in my shops, I think that day until midnight, trying to get all my tills and making sure that it was work, because we hadn't had to change our VAT rate before. It had just been locked in, and I needed to make sure that it worked.
Willie Rennie, forgive me, I didn't read every line of the Liberal Democrat manifesto.
Have you?
What did it say? Yes, that's my next question. VAT. Do you support the principle of it coming down? And just this wider issue again about regulation, minimum unit pricing, etc. Is there too much, and could some of that be reined back?
I mean, I agree with Kenny in terms of tweaking. In principle, I don't like the massive rises that we had in recent years on VAT, because it hits the pockets of ordinary people who are on low income. So instinctively, I don't like it. But I've never seen the public finances in this state. I mean, we've had this year or last year in-year cuts to budgets, and that rarely happens within government. They are in a terrible state, shocking state. We've had an awful lot of budget lines that have been cut that are really, really important because the government had no other choice. So, to be frank, I don't see it happening. I think the issue that we need to look at, though, is the cumulative effect of all the measures that we're introducing. Because there's individual measures, it's difficult to disagree with them. So I was a strong advocate for minimum unit price on alcohol. Probably everybody in this room was probably against the increase recently. I was in favour of it. Now, I can understand why people object to it, but I can understand more why people would object to the number of different measures and the pace of the change that we're asking you to implement and the short notice of it. So I can get all that. And that's why we need to make sure that we look across the piece about what we're asking you to do and make sure it's done in an orderly fashion. Now, I said at the beginning, my dad was a grocer. Now, there used to be people who used to come into my dad's shop and get all of their weekly shopping. Now, that rarely happens with a local shop now. It has transformed dramatically. The proportion of your business that comes from alcohol, tobacco, vaping, probably gambling, all of those is much higher than it's ever been. And those are exactly the areas that government's trying to clamp down on. So I understand why you're feeling the pressure. What we need to do is to help you transition your businesses into something that is sustainable for the long term, to make sure we've got a facility that's available for local people to be able to access the goods that they need when they need them within their community. That's where we need to be working in partnership together to help you through this next phase, because it's tough. We've said that many times, all of us, it's tough. We kind of dreaded in part coming to this because we know that you're angry with an awful lot of what government's asking you to do. But what I think the main thing I've concluded from this discussion is the pace of change, the amount of change, and how exactly we work in partnership to make sure that change is effective so we do have businesses in your community.
Well, I hope you can see they're a friendly bunch, Willie. Don't say about it. The gentleman at the back's got a question. Things might be about to change. Who knows? Yes, sir.
No, it probably will change. I think politics should be about people as opposed to policies and parties. And in the past, I've voted for people, even though they had no chance of actually winning. And a lot of that comes from a word which has been mentioned twice before, and that's trust, or the lack of trust. So I would like everybody that's on the stage within 3 sentences or less to tell me and the people here why we should trust them.
Okay, well, that's a good question. Kenny McCaskill, do you want to start?
Well, I think I have a track record of saying what I mean, meaning what I say, and being prepared to stand by positions whether they're popular or not. At the end of the day, I think you elect people in to take decisions. I've shown in my time in office that I've been prepared to do that. I believe that they're right. I believe that they've made the country a better place, and I've been grateful to have been given that opportunity and seek to do so again.
But do you understand why the actions of politicians across many parties might have led to a lack of trust?
Oh, absolutely. I think there has been a decline in the body politic, and I can understand the growing condemnation that applies across, all political parties. It's not uniform or unique to Scotland. It's happening across, the Western democracies. We see it on our TV stage with the, presidential election in the United States. So I think at the end of the day, I think the gentleman has a point. People, they should be voting for individuals. The individuals do have to espouse positions. I would call them policies. You can renounce them as policies, but they do have to be positions that have to be able to be implemented, because civil servants and government have to be able to transpose what politicians wish once they become into government into what can practically be impacted on the ground. But as I say, I think we're in a stage in the country where more and more people are looking for change, but I'm not necessarily sure that the change that they're being offered by the major political parties is going to be any change at all, which is why I think there's an opportunity for others.
Brian Whittle, address that issue of trust and why it's being eroded.
Can I use
In
the same
three
num-
sentences.
In 3 sentences, yes.
Can I use the same 3 sentences that Kenny McCaskill just did there? I think, in terms of politics, it's not just the USA. We look at what's happening in Belgium, look at what's happening in Germany, look at what's happening in France. It's a worry. But what I will say, and I've always said this, that every MSP or MP or even councillor that I've ever met do what they do because they want to make things better. I don't do personal politics for that very reason. So I do think that, but we lose our way sometimes. We forget in the bubble that there are people out there that we affect. But I think there's such a seismic shock at the moment in our whole political system. It's brought people back to attention. So in terms of, I understand why you want to give us a hard time, but I've not met any politicians who get into politics for any other reason than to make people's lives better. We have a different way of maybe doing it, but that's what our view is.
Okay. Daniel Johnson.
So look, I don't know if I'll manage 3 sentences, but let me
we
try
haven't
3
managed so
ideas.
far, yeah.
So first of all, politics is about people, and I always say, if you're not interested in talking to people, understanding their problems, and trying to fix their issues, then you shouldn't be in politics. You have to in fact, you have to love knocking on doors and working at your surgeries. And for me, that's the nuts and the bolts of the job. That's why I put myself back up for election at the last election, and why I can continue in politics. And I think that's really fundamental. Second thing I'd say is look, we have an incredibly challenging set of circumstances in front of us. In a sense, what Labour are doing is not the kind of the easy thing, it's the hard thing. We're being accused of being a bit boring. We're being accused of maybe not being ambitious enough, but that's because we recognise the challenge, and that's what we've attempted to do by setting out our missions. So actually setting out, rather than just policies, which might be sort of very narrow and maybe not be that meaningful, is set in very clear terms what the priorities of the government would be, and therefore how you can judge how we will make our decisions, and actually the character of that the future government. Because I think more than policies, character is what really matters from both politicians and political parties. And the final thing I say is, one thing I'll just reflect on is I think we do a bad job of really reflecting the reality of political discussion. Because the reality is most political discussion is actually like this. It's not, pointy or jabby, it's not personal. Actually, it's pretty good-humoured and pragmatic and able to agree to disagree. Whereas what we present is what you see at Prime Minister's questions and First Minister's questions. And I think politicians do politics a disservice by presenting that confrontational politics. Because yes, there is disagreement, but normally it's much more boring disagreement like this.
Well, Rennie, do you want to try 3 sentences? Give you a bit
I
more.
think you should trust everybody on this panel, because we've told you what you didn't want to hear today. We've seen your list of priorities, and we've not agreed to them. We've told you things you don't really like to hear. But what we've said is we'll work with you to try and make sure we get this transition. So everybody here has been honest with you, and therefore I think you should trust us. If we had refused to come today, I wouldn't have trusted us. Perhaps somebody hasn't come today. I'm not pointing at anybody in particular. But we have been honest and straightforward with you. There will be times that we break our promise. I've broken my promise before. And I try to be upfront with people once I've done that and explain why that's been done. I work in my community and communities across Scotland to try and build the trust, because I see what you see. I see the cynicism. I see the disinterest. And I work bloody hard to make sure I can build up the trust by helping people get houses or cut their fuel bills or make sure their businesses survive. That's how you build trust. And all of us do that. All of us.
Okay, thank you.
And one of the things we do, you're asking us questions, but we're also listening, entirely to what's happening out there. As Willie says, we knew we were going to say some things today that you didn't agree with. But in terms of, say, minimum unit pricing of alcohol, I've got real concerns over that, and I have voiced those concerns, because at the end of the day, I'm not sure the outcome of the implementation of minimum unit pricing has actually matched what the initial input was. And I'm not against trying things, but if the outcome doesn't happen in the way I think it should have happened, I'm quite, we are all prepared to stand up and hold the Scottish Government to account. But it's by listening to, we've probably learned more than you have today. And it's by listening to the feeling from you guys and the input from you guys that will allow us to go back and if you're ever watching Parliament and one of us says something, you go, that bugger there, I gave him that line. That happens quite a lot. So I think the most important thing is that we listen to what you've got to say so that we understand the outcomes of policy that have been implemented by the Scottish Government.
Well, just Kenny McCaskill on that, do politicians need to engage more at other times rather than elections when you want our votes?
Well, absolutely. I have to say, in politics, I've always sought to do that, to have regular meetings. I had that in government, but I have it in opposition, and I continue to do it. I meet with the Scottish Police Federation, I meet with Prison Officers Association, I meet with council leaders, in my own patch, I meet with all those representatives from the Health Board. It's the only way that you can learn. I think, I was a lawyer, I did a degree in law, and I recognise now that I spend a lifetime trying to get an education. What I have to do is to go out, meet, learn, and to take it from there and engage. So, sometimes governments feel isolated. I have to say, when I was in government, there was always regular meetings and the door was always open to any organisation that wanted to come. But equally, I think you just have to get out and on the doors. It's not necessarily in the doors. I usually meet over a cup of coffee in a hotel lobby or something like that when I'm meeting organisations or go to their offices. But you have to engage with the stakeholders, because that is how our society is built. It's from the ordinary people, but it's the representatives at whatever level, those who speak to them, whether it's the SGF, whether it's the SPF, and as I say, that's where you get the information.
Okay. Well, look, I think we could probably draw a line under things there, but look, thank you all very much indeed for coming. Good luck to all of you, whatever the outcome of the election. Could you say thank you very much indeed to our panel?
Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings us to the conclusion of things for today. But lunch is being served next door in the exhibition space, so take your time, have some food, have a chat with our exhibitors, and we'll get a chance to have a chat with some of our panellists from before as well. So thank you all very much indeed for coming. Have a nice afternoon.